The indexed whole life feature. So this is something that is relatively new. It has been around since 2016 with a couple carriers. Only a couple insurance companies presently offer this as an option, but we do expect it to become more and more popular in the present interest rate environment and as companies become comfortable with it. So what it is really a means to take a whole life insurance policy, not a universal life. So we're mixing the indexing feature that makes universal life attractive, but then we've got the universal life issue with the increasing expenses, but apply it to a whole life with the strong guarantees and such. Now, there are pros and cons to it like everything, so it's good to be aware of exactly how it works. So what it is, it revolves around a whole life insurance policy. Okay. Now, with any whole life insurance policy, what do we have? Well, with most companies, a guaranteed rate of 4%. We're going to explain how the basic dividend option works here. Pardon my poor penmanship. So if I have a guaranteed rate of 4%, that is the minimum floor, meaning at no point in time will I earn less than a gross rate of 4%. I say gross because all rates, guarantees, dividend indexing is credited after the company's insurance expenses and mortality charges. But to get back on track, guaranteed rate of 4%, and because it's a whole life insurance, that guaranteed rate always exceeds my cost of insurance, and that's why I see my values go up. Now, a company will declare a surplus each year if they have a surplus, meaning after all of their costs, expenses, payouts were made, they have a surplus in earnings. And here's exactly how the dividend is calculated. So I have a guaranteed rate of 4% and a surplus of 2%. That equates to my total dividend rate on a cash value life insurance policy. So when I see the dividends adjust up and down each year, typically down right now in the low interest rate environment, it's based on the company's surplus. The total dividend rate is not that plus the guarantee. I know there's sometimes confusion on that. So as we progress, that's how the dividend is calculated. Now, as we look at the indexing strategy, so let's give ourselves some space here. This indexed feature is an option. And when I say option or it's optional, it's not something that I have to select at the beginning, yes or no, and that's it forever, like a lot of features that are associated with whole life insurance. It's optional in the sense that I can adjust it over time. I can go back and forth between receiving the dividend or the surplus and the indexing feature, but we'll get more into that. Here's how it works. It's optional. Another way to put it is really, it's a rider. It is the exact same whole life product with the exact same guaranteed rate of 4%. That's your minimum floor. So that won't go down by attaching that indexed rider. Here's the thing, the surplus, instead of receiving that, I can index my cash value or have it tied to the S&P 500 index. Meaning, if the company declares a surplus of 2% for a total dividend of 6%, that would be the declared dividend rate on my policy that year. If I elect to participate in the index strategy with the S&P 500, instead of participating in the company's surplus, I will receive performance based off of what the S&P 500 index did. So indexing, in case you're not aware of how that works, it tracks the S&P 500 in this example. So market goes up, you go up with it. Market goes down, you still receive the guarantee of 4%. So if the S&P produced for our policy 4%, the total gross crediting rate that year would be 8%. Now, there is a catch here. With this an index option, if I exercise it, there is a charge. With most companies, there probably always will be. We have seen right around a 2% charge. So what that means is if I have the indexed feature attached and exercise it, I can have it attached if it's not on. If I have it at a 0% allocation, there's no charge. But if I allocate 100% of my cash value to the index strategy, I am going to be assessed a 2% charge. So in this case, what it would do, it dropped my total to what? 6%, which just so happens to match that dividend there. Good to be aware of this. Now, we did mention this, 100%, if 100% of my cash value is tied to the index. Well, what does that mean? Well, when it comes to the index strategy, put this in a different color. Couple things here. One, we can adjust the allocation year to year. So what that means is, let's say you start out a policy year one, and you allocate 0% of your cash value to the S&P 500, the index strategy that is. 0%, what happens here is no charge is assessed because you have the rider attached, but you're not exercising it. So you receive only the basic dividend surplus. Now, year two comes. You decide to allocate 100% of your cash value to the S&P 500 index strategy. What would happen is the 100% of your cash value, that's all of your cash value tied to the S&P 500 index, regardless of how it performs, receives that 2% charge, or it is assessed with that. So where that can hurt us is if we tie everything to the index strategy and the market tanks, well, what are we left with? We have the guaranteed rate of 4% minus the charge. That leaves us with a net guarantee of 2%. That's where it can potentially hurt us. That is the major drawback. Now, year three comes. Let's say we do this. Let's say we tie 50% of our cash value and allocate it to the index strategy. Because you can go back and forth and you can adjust, you can make it 50% S&P index, 50% dividend. You can go 10% index, 90%. You can go 82% one way and put the rest in the other. Point being is you can mix it up. You're not committed to only even ratios and such, or all or nothing. You can be flexible in that, or the policy can be flexible in that respect. So if we go with an example like this, year three, let's say you had 100K in cash. Now you've got 50K in the dividend and 50K in the index. Let's do this, 50K I for index strategy, 50K D for dividend. The 50K that is tied to the index strategy is assessed with the 2% charge. The 50K tied to the company's basic dividend rate or surplus does not receive the charge. So again, where it would hurt us is if everything tanked and it produced nothing, or if it produced a lower rate than what the surplus produced. Good to be aware of this kind of stuff. So you've got some flexibility there. We can adjust the allocation of the actual index strategy as time passes. Overall, it is a nice feature to be aware of. Typically, what we'll recommend for companies that offer it is when we start a life insurance policy, historically, the dividend has produced. This is a feature that allows slightly greater earning potential on a life insurance policy. That's nice to have, but it doesn't mean we should go all in with it, because if things tank, we're left with only the guarantee and actually less because of that charge that usually comes with it. Attaching it for added potential is nice. What some will do is attach it to a policy and say, I'm just going to participate in the dividend forever. But in the event that there's a market correction, that might be a good time to flip it on for a year. Whether I go 10% indexing, 50% or 100% for a year while the rebound occurs. Now, one last thing I forgot to mention is there is a cap on earnings. Meaning, if the S&P produces 30%, that does not mean that I'll participate in that 30% gain. There is going to be a cap. The cap typically ranges, let's do it up here, or over here because I'm running out of space, from 8%, that's the minimum floor, meaning a company will never make the floor lower than 8%. Now, it does depend on the insurance company, but we've seen that to be fairly standard. But then at the same time, the current cap, we see this to be quite consistent, is 12.5%. So if we're looking at the current cap rate, if it's 12.5%, the market produces 30%, I'm going to only earn 12.5%. Then remember, I've got the 2% charge, so that brings me down to 10.5%. Then the company assesses their insurance expenses, their mortality charges, which will pull me down probably closer to 8 to 8.5%. Good to be aware of this stuff. This way I don't have any ill surprises at the end of the day. Know this is a lot to absorb. Overall, good feature to be aware of. Reach out with any questions. Hope this helps. Hey guys, Steve Parisi here. If you enjoyed the content you just saw, please subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell for future videos. If you'd like more information or to see some custom policies for yourself, feel free to call or email our offices at the contact information below.